Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes Senior Editor, Dan Alexander. Dan, thanks for coming on in.
Sure thing, thank you.
You have been covering the Donald Trump New York civil fraud trial now for a few weeks. It is winding down. Before we get into it, can you give us the highlight reel?
Oh gosh, well it's been at this point almost 2 months, maybe even a little bit more. So this has been a long trial. Trump himself has showed up at least a half dozen times. He's been on the stand. His sons, Eric and Don Jr., have both been on the stand. His daughter, Ivanka, has been on the stand. But largely, this is a documents case. So although all of the theatrics and them showing up and criticizing the AG and her retorting outside of the courthouse gets a lot of attention, talk about gag orders and all of that, really this case mostly comes down to documents that are filed on the docket of the trial, of the case. And those are much sort of more black and white, not as exciting, but they're also harder to refute. You know, numbers that are wrong in financial statements that they certified were accurate. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So that's where the meat is, but the highlights might be in sort of more of the show that's been put on.
And we've talked for a while now. Michael Cohen was on the stand. There was theatrics there. Something that people can expect, probably more theatrics, is on Monday, Donald Trump is actually going to testify. What are we expecting?
So Donald Trump has already testified once. He's going to return to the stand. The first time he was called by the state New York Attorney General's office. Now he's going to be called by the defense. He's expected to be the last witness of the entire trial. I don't think that this is going to be something where he's going to, put on a convincing case that his documents all made sense or something like that. Really, this is sort of a PR campaign and almost a political stop. And, I think you can expect him to be up on the stand and to, lash out at the judge, to lash out at the Attorney General. He already did that once. I think this is a chance for him to generate headlines and attention and really push the public view of the case to considering this judge to be biased against him and the case to be unfair. But in terms of the actual meat of the case and the facts of it, I don't think that we're going to see much, if anything, that's going to move the needle on that.
You've seen a few of the Trumps testify. You've said Ivanka Trump was more serious. Don Jr. was joking around. What type of witness on the stand is Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is many things in real life, and he's also many things as a witness on the stand. He can be, cautious and careful in moments. He can be outraged and totally unhinged in others. He has sometimes some surprising, ability to say things that are very open and true. In other cases, he's just lying one thing after the next. You'll see all of that on the stand. I think one of the questions that'll be interesting to see for this testimony versus the testimony that he gave previously is now he's going to be largely under questioning from his own lawyers. And so they can choreograph this much more carefully. Now he's going to face cross-examination, but the bulk of it will probably be from his own lawyers. And so I don't expect his emotions to get as high and low and for everything to be sort of as, shocking and jarring with him, lashing out and yelling at the judge from the stand and that sort of stuff, unless that's what they want. Either way, I think that you're going to see something that feels much more scripted in the way that Donald Trump never really feels scripted, but, certainly in comparison to the first time that he testified, I think we'll see more like that.
I am curious, you said this doesn't really potentially move the needle for him in any way. So what is the point of him getting back on the stand?
It's just public opinion. This whole trial has been trying to, convince the country that he's a victim of political persecution, that this judge is biased against him, and he will use his testimony on Monday to do the same thing. Even though there are no cameras in the room, there will be plenty of reporters, including I'll be there, and everybody will be reporting live about what he's saying. And if he's saying that the judge is biased and this whole thing is unfair, that will be reported, and there will be plenty of people who, regardless of whether or not those claims are true, will believe what he says.
He's saying this is political persecution. He's saying this is a witch hunt. You're saying this is a documents case and it's pretty black and white. So can you remind us what exactly are the stakes for Donald Trump?
So the New York Attorney General is trying to get him to pay upwards of $250 million. He also could be forced to sell off certain assets. They could cancel his business certificates for many of the entities that make up the Trump organization. Those things would not put him out of business. Donald Trump could afford to pay $250 million. He has the cash to do that, but it will limit his ability to grow in the future, and it could lead to some credit problems. He has some pretty troublesome loans that are coming due, particularly one in a building called 40 Wall Street. Having to pay back that loan plus having to pay a significant fine could leave him really strapped for cash as he's mounting this presidential campaign. And ultimately it goes to sort of the core of who he is. Is this guy, a really successful, rich business person? And I think that people sort of generally have their mind made up about that, but certainly the trial has helped make people's mind up about that already. It's shown a lot of ways in which he was lying about the value of his assets, and something that has been talked about in the media forever. I mean, Forbes has been reporting on Donald Trump lying about the value of his assets for upwards of 40 years, but to have an attorney general show that he was also lying to banks and insurance companies makes this a more serious thing, and I think it will impact, by the end of it, sort of his overall reputation as a business person. But right now, most of the evidence has been presented. Most of the testimony has been given. I don't think that with the final expert witness today and with Donald Trump on Monday, that we're going to get a bunch of new information that's going to change the way that people view that from what they've already learned at this point.
Something that's really interesting here to us particularly is the Forbes tie-in, where Forbes knew he was lying about his assets for 40 years. So why is he just getting in trouble now in 2023?
So, it's not a crime to lie to the media or to lie to the public. You're not allowed to lie to your banks or your insurance companies. You can't create false business records. So if you, for example, tell Forbes magazine that your penthouse is 30,000 square feet, and Forbes magazine figures out that it's in fact 11,000 square feet, that might be embarrassing. It's not a good look, but you're not going to get charged with committing crimes for that. In this case, a lot of the lies that Donald Trump was telling the media were replicated on bank statements. And it wasn't until Michael Cohen, one of his former attorneys, flipped on Donald Trump and testified before Congress saying that, in fact, those lies were replicated from the media to banks and insurance companies, that then the New York State Attorney General opened up an investigation into all of this. They started subpoenaing records, and then you could see in black and white the documents that showed that these lies went beyond just boasting to reporters and actually included lies to banks and insurance businesses.
I'm glad we're talking about this today, his upcoming testimony, but that originally wasn't going to be the topic of our conversation. And when we scheduled this conversation earlier in the week, we were going to talk about Eric Trump's testimony. That ended up not happening. Why is that?
Eric Trump was supposed to be on the witness stand yesterday. He had also testified, called by the state, and was supposed to be called by the defense team yesterday. From a legal perspective, it was hard to see what they were going to gain by putting Eric Trump on the stand. They've said that they feel that most of the points that he was going to make were already made by other witnesses. And of course, they already had a chance to question him under cross-examination when the state called him. There is risk anytime that you appear on the witness stand. And particularly for the Trumps, we've seen several instances where the Trumps or their employees or former employees have said things on the witness stand that aren't true, and you can face perjury charges over that sort of stuff. So anytime that you put somebody on, you're taking a risk, and if there's not much to gain from it, why do it? I think that the putting Donald Trump on the stand from a convincing the public that this is all a witch hunt or whatever, is going to generate a lot more coverage and have a lot more credibility. And he is just more explosive on the stand than Eric will be. You don't need sort of a JV warm-up to that. You can just go straight to Trump and get the point across.
Let's look into the future a bit here. Aside from Trump being on the witness stand on Monday, is there anything regarding his legal troubles that's on your radar that you want to put on ours?
Well, he's got a lot of legal troubles, but focused mostly on the big business stuff. I think that the big question is what the size of this penalty is going to be. And then ultimately, as you look out, a year, 2 years down the line, particularly with this loan from 40 Wall Street, how his cash position is affected both by the penalties that could be imposed in this case and then by how he chooses to solve or not solve his debt problems at 40 Wall Street. And those two things combined are going to determine what his liquidity position is, either during his second term in office or, in sort of the twilight of his career. Can this business continue to grow, or will it essentially be sort of a shrinking base that, he needs to pull money from and will sort of plateau or dwindle over time?
You did use the phrase strapped for cash. Your team also has gotten the net worths of all of the candidates. He is far and away the richest one with a couple of billion. What does strapped for cash mean relative to Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, right now we estimate that Donald Trump has over $400 million in cash. So he's doing fine. But again, if he has to pay $250 million here and $130 million to solve a debt problem, all of a sudden things get a little bit tight. Remember, if you have $20 million in cash left over, to most people, that's not the thing that you would be worried about. But if you have significant assets that are worth billions of dollars that can, in a moment's notice, start bleeding significant amounts of money or require, for example, huge capital improvements. Let's say that you need to fix up a building to draw on a tenant or something like that. You can need that much cash, and you can need it really fast. And people don't go bankrupt because they don't have any net worth. They go bankrupt because they run out of cash. And so that's really the number that you look at. Can you pay your creditors either through cash that you have or by refinancing other assets? Trump has a lot of issues with financing over the years too that make it more complicated for him to pull cash out of his assets than a typical real estate investor. So when you think about, is this empire going to be able to hang on? Really the key question is, how much cash does he have? And no, $20 million is not enough for him to be able to sleep well at night.
How precarious is this position of the empire being able to hang on dependent on the penalty?
Well, it's a big factor. I mean, I don't think that the penalty itself is going to knock him out. But if he has to pay $250 million in a penalty because of the case, and then, for instance, he has to pay off creditors at 40 Wall Street, say $130 million, you're up to $380 million right there. All of a sudden, things start to get a little bit tight. If you have another loan coming due that you have to pay off, or, like I said, if you have a big capital improvement that you have to make, all of a sudden things can get pretty uncomfortable. Also, with a lot of loans, there are liquidity requirements. So the bank will require you to maintain a certain net worth or a certain amount of cash so that then they can be confident that if you run into problems that you're going to be able to pay them back. So if you look, for example, at what happened when COVID-19 hit, Donald Trump's properties, many of them were hemorrhaging money. And so he had to reach into his own pockets, take cash, and put those into the businesses to keep things afloat. Now, if you start to get low on cash and all of a sudden some unexpected event happens, well, that's why there's a bunch of bankruptcies in moments of crisis, because people get tight, something unexpected happens, and voila, you end up, with major credit problems and huge bankruptcies. So when we know what the size of the penalty is, we'll know sort of how precarious of a position or not he will be in. But right now, before the penalty has been levied, I think that his cash position looks relatively stable, but things could change if a big number comes out.
Dan, per usual, thanks for your insights. Thanks for teeing this up for us, and I will be sure to be following along to you as you're in the courtroom on Monday.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you.